Okay, greetings everybody, and welcome to Mahamudra for the People. It's lovely to be here, and especially after a little bit of a break. I was up in, or not up, over in LA for a death and dying retreat at Pearland Farms. And I'm back, so it's great to be back with everybody. And yes, I guess I wanted to just let some folks know, or everybody here, and anybody who watches this recording, that there is an introduction to Ati Yoga or Dzogchen program that's online that begins tomorrow through the Soa Rigpa Institute. And I think Eric might share the link to that. And then two programs through the Yangti yoga platform. One of them is actually a 2-year Vajrayana spiritual formation program, which is a really great way for people that want to be moving into a little bit more formal pastoral caregiving for others. And this could be like a good kind of launch point for entering into chaplaincy or wanting to develop a kind of more rigorous relationship to one's own spiritual formation. And that's a really exciting program. And then the other is a program on the Karma Nintik, this Ati Yoga cycle that comes from Rangjung Dorje, the third Karmapa, which will begin, both of those will begin in January of 2024. So there's a lot going on. And Rodrigo, my trip to Mexico got postponed to January 25th. So I'll be down in Mexico City then. And we'll keep going with Hatha Yoga then and there. I may meet Juanita on Friday. She happens to be in the city. So, and yeah, so again, it's really lovely to be here with everybody. I I wasn't cheating on you guys, but I did teach a song that that I'm going to teach today at the Death and Dying Retreat. It's a nice, very short one called the Charya Giti of Saraha, which is quite short. It's only 6, it's not even really stanzas, like basically 6 sentences. And what I'd like to do is actually intersperse them. So between each statement, really kind of 6 statements, a little bit of practice, right? Because I think these kinds of texts, they will get rather heady, or we can get rather heady and intellectual, and that's fun, but that's also not the point, right? Everybody here is really smart, and that's evident. And the practice of Mahamudra is not really meant to be an intellectual practice. It's really an embodied practice at the end of the day. So so this is what we'll be starting with. Before we do, though, I want to see if anybody has any questions about anything that we may have done up until now, or reflections or this kind of thing. Oh yeah, Richard.
Just a really small thing, Justin. A couple of weeks ago, you'd just come out of your dark retreat, and you're feeling a little bit. I can't remember the phrase you used, but at 6s and 7s would do. And you said you had wanted to follow up on the pointing out instructions, but you weren't feeling quite up to it that day. Yeah. And I just want to bring that up again because I think it would be really valuable if you still wanted to do that.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Let's do that next Tuesday then. That sounds like a good thing. And yeah, happy to do that. Happy also to kind of share a little bit more about well, let me work in some of the more recent insights, so to speak, or whatever they were from that retreat into this song, because I think, some of this pertains, if that feels good to folks. Okay, good. Any other? I just want to make sure everybody feels like they're being met where they are. So any other questions or thoughts or reflections before we dive in? Okay. All right, great. Well, you can always put something in the chat box. I have it open, so I see, and then, and of course, raise hands or anything. There's more than enough room. So this is a very short song, and so it's called oh yeah, sure. Well, I only have it in translation, so it's just the Charya Giti of Saraha. So and the Charya Giti are these here we go. These kind of rather terse meaning in this particular case, particularly tight, you could say tight little seeds of song. The tightness is as if they're these hard dried seeds that we will hear, and they just expand over time the more we practice them. So a little bit like Tilopa's 6 nails, Tilopa's 6 nails is short, brief, pithy, but one can spend a long time unpacking them, which is kind of one thing that I've done for at least 28 years. And this really kind of deep relationship ensues. So we'll begin with the first one, the first line rather. Our own concepts and projections create samsara and nirvana. By our own minds are we imprisoned in this world. Right, so I'm just going to repeat this. Our own concepts and projects create samsara and nirvana. By our own minds are we imprisoned in this world. And this is somewhat self-evident. Our suffering is primarily created by our own experience of this, right? The storyline, the narrative structure, the way by which we project onto phenomenon, everything that we think we experience, the value judgments, etc. And by our own minds, so by this process, right, we're imprisoned in this world. We experience samsara. So I'll relate this a little bit to one of the things that was real kind of rich in this last dark retreat was this particular, it connects to this, right, is this idea that the human realm, which we happen to be in, right, of all these 6 realms, God's realm, demigod realm, human realm, animal realm, hungry ghost realm, and then the hell realms, we are in the human realm. And the human realm is, the samsara of the human realm is typified by this desire to make it better, right? To we want to experience a freedom from suffering. We want to feel good. We want to feel loved. We want to feel whole. We don't want to suffer. And really, as humans, it is our own conceptuality, our own projecting, our own need, like strong desire to transform this, that contributes quite a great deal to our suffering. and how to move beyond that suffering, or how to be able to experience the liberation from that suffering, or the nirvana, kind of side of the equation, is to completely release ourselves from all of this, right? So, to use Raha's words, to liberate ourselves from our own concepts, to liberate ourselves from our projects, to liberate ourselves from our projections, to liberate ourselves from our hang-ups, or to use Trungpa's language, to liberate ourselves from our neurosis, thereby liberating ourselves from both samsara and nirvana. Right? And this is our work if we want it to be. Nobody's going to do it for us. And we need to make the decision. There's this Gaurav Dorje's 3 points that, kind of strike the heart, or 3 statements, can be broken down to the first being the nature of mind. Nature of mind is vast, primarily pure, unstainable, unchangeable, has no center, has no edge, right? So the first part is experiencing this. The second of the points is, when we experience this, the question is ours, or the option is ours, or the work is ours, as to whether or not we want to fully manifest this. Right? So it's like tasting something, and like, oh, this tastes good. Well, if you really want to experience this, then you just have to do the work, right? And the third point is, his instruction on doing the work, which is coming back to this, coming back to this, coming back to this, coming back to this, coming back to this. And it's fascinating because I think that there is this natural progression, like in hospice, we talk about disease progression, how disease moves, from one phase to another, causing all sorts of different symptoms. In the context of hospice, disease progression means, one moves closer and closer to death and they die. And in another, like, kind of similar analogy, I think it's worth feeling into our samsara progression, right? Sometimes we are so dissatisfied by samsara that we need an escape from it. And the first thing we try to do is pretty this whole thing up, right? Or gussy this thing up. And neither one will help. The thing that we need to be able to change is our reliance, addiction, completely unexamined assumptions of the conceptual basis of what this whole experience is. Right? This is the only thing that will do it. We can't, you can't work away the human realm. I mean, think of all, the whole breadth of humanity being, what, let's say 5,000 years, right? 5,000 years takes us to kind of like the golden age of ancient Egypt, right? All the way back to that. Right? For these 5,000 years, there has been no person who has been able to transform this human realm into a realm of non-suffering. And there will never be, because it's just not possible. It's like trying to do something, change a mathematical equation, right? Make it what it isn't. And this realm is typified by this. The exit strategy has to be destroying the brackets that keep us stuck in here, which is our relationship to conceptuality, projection, externalization, this binary of external and internal, or self and other. So with this, let's take a moment, and I'm going to recite this once again, and we're going to intersperse this with very, very short sits. So 7 minutes, right? So allow yourself to get as comfortable as you can for a brief sitting. You can be reclining with coffee in your hand, that's fine, or tea. Just take a moment to let your body be comfortable, your breath really relaxed, easeful, no, intense, no, intense relationship with ourselves. Be very self-compassionate. Our own concepts and projections create samsara and nirvana. By our own minds are we imprisoned by this world. And gently bring yourself back. So feeling into this reminds me, I was reading this text on Dzogchen a couple days ago from the Bun text on Dzogchen, and there's a really interesting reference to Longchenpa. Longchenpa was a great Nyingma master, great just incredible Dzogchen practitioner and writer. He wrote a text called the Choying and a number of kind of other texts that ended up helping to explain this, the view and the practice of Ati Yoga or Dzogchen. And in this text that I was reading, the author was trying to remind people that Longchenpa shared this view, this kind of, you could say, parallel to what we find in the Chan tradition. There was this view propagated by Hashang Mahayana, who was, there had been this debate that had happened at Sami Monastery between Hashang Mahayana and Shantarakshita about the which style of Dharma practice would be the preferred and state-sponsored, or early Tibetan Empire sponsored form of Dharma practice. And Hasham Mahayana kind of represented this Chan, or Chinese Zen, so to speak, view that included the possibility not only of sudden enlightenment, but there was kind of this other piece to this where it doesn't matter what the quality of your thoughts are. What matters is resting into non-conceptuality, and letting thoughts dissolve into the natural essence from which they arose, which is, from the perspective of Dzogchen is Rigpa. From the perspective of Mahayana, we could say is vast, open, spacious awareness. There being practically, from all intents and purposes, no differentiation between the two. And this view was really unpopular, especially amongst people that followed kind of like the more Indian model of the slow purification of mind and thought activity. So why I'm bringing this up right now is that this is exactly the same point that Saraha is making, right? That our problem is our conceptual fixation on good and bad and up and down and left and right and black and white and all of the binaries, right? All this kind of stuff, this constant push-pull. And what he's saying is that, and this is exactly what Longchenpa was saying, and what Hashang Mahayana was saying as well, that it doesn't really matter if you could have all the worst thoughts in the world. All of those are exactly the same nature as all of the same good thoughts, right? If we take a little bit of time to examine the mind, whether it's a virtuous thought might make us feel good, right? But in terms of actual quote unquote technical experience, there's no difference. It arises from the same place. It sticks around for as long as it does, and it dissolves back into the same thing. It doesn't stain the mind. It doesn't make you a bad person. If it's a bad thought, it doesn't make you a good person if it's a good thought. Although we tend to ironically really feel that it does, right? So if we have a lot of like conflicting thoughts or difficult emotions, or whatever the case may be, we may think, oh, I'm a terrible person, I'm a terrible, we create this whole incredibly unfortunate structural narrative about ourselves. And then similarly about good thoughts. Oh, I'm so I'm so pure, I'm so holy, I'm really I'm not the problem, I'm the solution. I am the 1%, the good 1%, not the other 1%, that's the bad 1%. I am compassionate, all of those other people are ignorant, blah 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 blah, all the things we tell ourselves to feel relatively okay, right? So even that doesn't last, right? That doesn't leave a mark. on the experience of mind. There is no differentiation between the two, right? And so, as we rest in these short moments, I want to encourage people to actually try to experience this for yourselves. Like, what is the who's propping who up here? This Ponzi scheme of identity, right? Am I doing this just to make myself feel better? Am I thinking the thoughts, or am I surrounding myself with all the requisite things to keep me feeling good? It's kind of basically speaks to our inability to be fully present by needing to constantly transform everything to make it better, which is this is actually a terrible problem. So Saraha then goes on to say, the next line is, I am a stupid yogin with a thought-free mind. What is birth and death to me? And so I am a stupid yogin, meaning I'm not thinking. Right? I've cut, I've lobotomized myself with Mahamudra. I have completely let go of, this whole, constant play to, good, bad, constant judgment, etc. What is birth and death to me, right? So birth and death, birth of thoughts, death of thoughts, birth being relatively positive, death being negative, right? Even this idea, though, of coming and going, right? The constancy of who we are. We're born, here we are at various stages of our life, and most of us are struggling like hell to stay alive and to not face this end, which is A, inevitable, but then B, a hallucination, right? Like, yes, death will come, and when it does, though, what happens? It's just this temporary phase change, and the story continues, right? We act, though, as if the book is the book is falling apart. So Susanna asked this question: how does one differentiate between choosing the action that causes the least or decreasing the most harm and trying to make things better? Well, for who? Right? So I mean, I think this is the first question, right? Like, I think if we're going to really like look at this, we need to crack it open, right? Obviously, being a compassionate presence and being a quote unquote force for good in people's lives to help alleviate others and their experiences of suffering is a good thing. But when we get so caught up in the ideas that they become permanent structures, like almost like a permanent structure within our psyche, then we can't negotiate with them. And that lack of negotiation, that lack of fluidity, the lack of flexibility, directly contributes to our experience of suffering and those around us, right? So we can be doing a good thing, right? So let's take good. So a conservative Republican good thing for and we take the migrant crisis in New York City, would be to have no shelter for people and give them the ability to work, and that's all. Right? We're giving you the opportunity to create your own, life, your own reality. And then there's no social, support, or net to help support you. Right? That is my idea of good. I am imposing this on you. You go. You go work, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That's good. Right? Of course, another person's sense of good will be different, right? New York City is a sanctuary city, and it is part of our values to be able to provide you know shelter, food, perhaps job training, other things, connect people to where they need to go, and this is part of, and that is good. And so what I'm pointing out here is that good and bad for is often a projected upon thing, right? And I don't want to go too much into like a a cold analysis of that. But I bring it up just because we need to, we can't rely just on good and bad, right? What does this mean, right? The least benefit for beings. I think the other thing is that there tends to be a lot of fear about playing around with this kind of assumption that we're somehow going to turn into people who don't care, right? And then, ultimately we need to decide for ourselves, like, what is the best use of this precious moment that we have here? And, again, there's no right answer for that. And I think that it's also worth noting that we can engage in relative behavior that brings benefit to others, while at the same time learning how to dissolve the concepts as well, if that makes sense, right? We don't have to be, it's like, in Vajrayana, well, in Buddhism in particular, there's a lot of virtue signaling based out of fear, right? People are afraid. We don't want to be perceived as, selfish or evil, or, there's that. But then there's also fear of consequences, right? Fear of this, it's almost like a punishment-based thing too, where a lot of people don't really examine really what the essence of Dharma isn't only external action. The essence of Dharma is how we relate to the phenomenal world. How we relate to the phenomenal world is not just our actions. How we relate to the phenomenal world is how clearly we're actually able to see and relate to everything that appears, right? And that being said, to your point, Susanna, we have to decide for ourselves what the right course of action should be. And I don't think there is a universally agreed upon convention around this either. I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah, Tony.
What about, sorry, I'm trying to phrase my question. Receiving wisdom from others when we think something is the right course of action, but it turns out it seems not to be, right? There obviously that's more that kind of relationality is not what's being talked about in simply in this discussion of simply realizing the nature of mind, if you can call that simple. But it seems rather important, and it's on my mind, I have to say, Lama, because you're using references to Trungpa quite a lot in the past few weeks. And that certainly brings up some things in me. I find that actually a useful challenge. But I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah. No, thank you for this. I mean, a good example of like a good, and you're talking like with respect to Trungpa, the like his actions.
Well, right? Yeah, I mean, he had a lot of extremely valuable teachings, and a lot of, over the course of his life, especially in his later years, a lot of it would be light to say questionable actions. I don't, maybe this isn't the space to go into it in great detail, but I'm sure you're aware of some of that. So and it seems to me that whatever his own, what him or me, whatever our own feeling of the basic purity of our thoughts and acts are, there's another level when it comes to relationality, and that's something that is on my mind. And actually, this kind of connects to something that you mentioned a few weeks ago. I don't remember in what session when, where you were talking about how one might approach the Bodhisattva vows from an Ati perspective. I don't know why that's coming up for in my mind related to this, but yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah, no, these are good questions. I mean, I think what is complicated about this, right, is this a broad brush application of all three yanas of Buddhism at one time, right? And what is worth considering is that it's not to say these three yanas are at odds with one another, but they're not all easily woven together. In fact, the question becomes from time to time, based on point of practice, whether or not there's even the necessity or the ability to do this, right? And it's not to say that there's conflict between them either, but it's, it's kind of like stained glass. Like each yana is a different color glass, right? And having them relationally together is beneficial for the practitioner. Layering them one on top of the other, though, might just make for a little bit of some confusion. And within Tantra, the relationship to ethics shifts to some extent. And I'm not saying this to defend Trungpa, but to say that from time to time, the relationship to ethics has more to do with activity within a very kind of specific set, which has much more to do with what is happening directly between the experience of phenomenon and the receptivity of that experience and the liberation. And this falls at times outside of the parameters, or doesn't land neatly within the parameters of like an ethical structure we find within the Mahayana tradition or Theravadan tradition. And all this is to say is that there have been and are attempts to kind of fuse all of these things together, but I think that it makes a big mess to assume that they all do. And I think this is why you will find some of like Trungpa's close students who would say, oh no, he was a Mahasiddha. He was doing exactly, he was following the Dharma to the letter of the law, as it were, even in his most controversial and, either self-destructive or harmful to others kind of behavior. While others would apply a different set and say, what, this is crazy town. Like I don't want to be part of this. And I don't think either one is necessarily right, and I don't think either one is necessarily wrong. Yeah, a lot of this has to do with this gets complicated, right? Because then we're applying you know, a kind of relational set of ethics to others, perhaps ourselves, when, especially when it comes to these more non-dual teachings, that mind and phenomena are beyond that anyway, you know. So I'm not trying to wiggle Trungpa out of this, but just address and name that there's a big conundrum and you know, a certain element. I mean, I would even go so far as to say messiness that is inherent in this process, and that's okay. And I think also relating to people in a relative way that preserves, so that we're not harming people, is very important. And also maybe more impossible than we would like to think. Right? I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying, you know, somebody was telling me last week, there was a student of a friend of mine is a student of previous Trala Rinpoche. Apparently, previous Trala Rinpoche used to say frequently, "Damned if you do, damned if you don't," right? And it wasn't it wasn't him, you know, kind of defending Trungpa, but it was about this complexity, right? Damned if you do rest into, you know, Rigpa and are existing in a completely non-dual way, right? Because you're showing up outside of the ways in which people organize themselves, right? And this causes discord, right? This can cause confusion, it can cause pain, but then he's also, you know, damned if you don't, right? Because then you fall right back into this binary. And it's not really an answer, but I think the one thing it points out is that the human mind, this is beyond our conceptual ability to even resolve it. And I think there's something very powerful in that too, because it causes you know, this kind of cognitive dissonance that can act as a little bit of a short circuiting, which I think is helpful. And then B, it reminds us that this is not something I can reason my way out of. I'm not a particularly bright person. And I know that preceding my existence in time, there have been all of these phenomenally brilliant people who for centuries have also determined this cannot be reasoned out. You know, if there was a one way, you know, it would be known, it would be evident, right? It would be discovered and we could all follow it and it would be a nice, you know, neat thing. But it's not particularly neat. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I mean, as Eric points out in his comment, it is really, it's interesting, it's complicated, and then also like again, there is a kind of colonial view on the right, just the right ethics. What are the right ethics? What should be done, what shouldn't be done? And I think kind of maybe reverberating from Eric's comment in the chat, perhaps taking a look at the fact that a lot of these kinds of non-dual perspectives arose in cultures that are very, very differently oriented than ours is in relationship to some of the ways we conceive of this, you know, binary in terms of ethics. Or at least there's an avenue for the exploration of this that is held with a certain amount of reverence in the tradition, even though it is still even problematic there. And then for us now, things are so polarized that it's even more complicated, perhaps. So yeah, Tony, are great questions. I hope that was a little helpful, but who
Yeah,
knows?
yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't expecting anything in particular, but that was very helpful, very much what I wanted to hear, and um, I really appreciate you responding. So,
Yeah,
and very, very much relates to some other things that we've been talking about lately. So, thank you.
totally. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like this is what makes like would take. I mean, I'm really convinced of this. Like, having a deeper relationship to non-duality, I think will help us solve some of our like large scale human societal problems, maybe not solve permanently, but help us be able to find other ways, like third and fourth or fifth, nothing that could be divided into two. So third, fifth, seventh, ninth, degrees of understanding how to deal with like the environmental crisis, right? How do we live in relationship to the earth? That can be in harmony with the earth while also trying to repair harm that's been done. Colonialism, it's a good thing too. Anything where there's a push-pull, like overly extreme thing, I think looking at non-dual solutions can be really helpful. And though, when it comes to our own lives and how we perceive, once we start going down the slippery slope of getting a little loose with these things, it does make things complicated. And that's not a bad thing. I think there can be a lot of like anxiety created by things getting really complicated. But they should, because this is a serious matter that requires all of us individually and maybe collectively as well to begin to unpack what it means for me to sever my relationship to conceptuality might be different than another person's and another person's and another person's and another person's. And I think that individual quality of this cannot be denied. Once it turns into like a universal thing, in terms of, oh, this is the way we follow it, this is what we do, this is what we have to believe, then it gets really again, it gets soft and unexamined and isn't particularly helpful, if not culty.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah, Lisa.
Actually, that was me.
Richard.
No, go ahead. There's something that's been occurring to me a lot over the years, and that is, and it just sort of came to me while you were talking, really, that I say we, but certainly I, kind of act as if I'm a Buddhist now, even though it's been, for the last 40 or so years, without fully acknowledging the extent to which we are all, or almost all, saturated in Christianity, and how that affects our kind of ethical, moral approach to the world and our sort of obligations to do something meaningful to help better society, or all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, even people who weren't raised in a Christian milieu may well have been influenced by the sort of colonial narrative about Christianity. And we can't sort of get out from under it so easily by just becoming Buddhists and sort of conflating bodhicitta with Christian or Augustinian ethics, or even, Socratic ethics. They're different things. And the culmination of bodhicitta is not helping other people, it's resting into spaciousness, right? And compassion arising naturally. It's all kind of different, and yet it's all mixed up. And I think it bears unpacking, really. I'm not quite sure how to do that, other than keep reminding myself that I'm not a pure Buddhist.
Yeah. I mean, Richard, thank you for this. I think the way to do this is through experience, and just experiencing, and not the same thing over and over again, experiencing different things. I know somebody who is kind of close with Trungpa's regent, Osel Tenzin, who is a very controversial person. And we were talking about this. We were talking about Osel Tenzin, and they were actually sharing with me that really, like, ultimately, Osel Tenzin most likely identified as being gay, and was married, and had kids, and was advised by Trungpa to just play the family man, stay in the closet, as it were. Right now, of course, by today's understanding of this, right, that's horrible, right? It's not considered particularly healthy, helpful, etc. However, what's really fascinating to me also about the kind of cross-cultural relationship to sexuality. So Tibetan, there are instances, like I am aware of cases where people will be, for example, polyandry was actually one of the few places that polyandry exists, like, naturally, quote unquote, or spontaneously, you could say, I suppose, is Tibet, right? Where within these family systems, it is not uncommon for women to have many partners, sometimes brothers, and they would, quote unquote, work it all out. And there might be a primary partner with whom the children kind of, would consider the father, but really people were kind of raised by a lot of the family altogether, right? Which is also, that falls out of the kind of binary, and Richard, to your point, this kind of very Christian, two people in a relationship kind of thing. And there are instances of especially when it comes to karma mudra, people being married or in serious committed relationships, which are the primary relationships, but then having these spiritual sexual partners on the side, that is not not necessarily an abuse, which again sometimes this Christian inspired scholarship will incessantly claim that it is an abuse of people's bodies, and an abuse of power, and this kind of thing too. So, and I'm just sharing this just to illustrate the complexity, Richard, that you shared. It may be impossible for us to be Buddhist, truly. I mean, throw that out there, right? With all of this like intense, unless we do that work, right? Unless we're really willing to get very, 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 very uncomfortable, right? Question our relationships to others, questions our relationships to ourselves, how we view ourselves, right? How we view the world around us. And I mean, if one is really to take Mahamudra and or Dzogchen or Hatha Yoga as a heart practice, I would say that it's really incumbent upon the practitioner to experiment in this way, right? And I don't mean experiment in harming people, but I mean experimenting in deconstructing the reality that we have been educated to believe is real, and the other part is experimenting by getting to know other ways of being, other ways of thinking, other ways of the presentation of things. I mean, I'm absolutely imperfect, and though, like, given like like a kind of a, I don't know, a long time of my Dharma practice intersecting with death, makes me feel very awkward around normal ways of thinking of death, normal ways of relating to death, culturally American ways of talking about death, right? It's So I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible. And it's messy and unpleasant. Like, and I mean, we all should name for ourselves, with no judgment to what anybody's decision is, like, how far we want to go into that kind of exploration too. I mean, our legal system, it's all based on, like, an Abrahamic set of ethics, right? I mean, hence, like, the complexity of gay marriage, right? Or the complexity of abortion in our country, right? Like, that is wrong. That is, like, all of the things that we have, like, that are really medieval, really, really, like, medieval ways of thinking that are still in this day and age. You know, we organize ourselves around. We might not like to, it might not be our preference. We can opt out, definitely. And though, when it comes to group structure, group interrelational dynamics, right? Like, opting out is sometimes, much harder than than just saying I'm not participating, or hashtag not my whatever it is, and having that be the case. Even if we take a practice like illusory body, right, where the real kind of, like, essence of this is to be able to like, feather away or dissolve the edges and structure of the way we know us to be and this reality to be. You can see really clearly how relatively arbitrary all of this is, and how not real all of this is. And I think also, to Richard's point, like, we have to, and this is the, goes back to the Trala Rinpoche quote, like, damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? It's kind of lonely and intense being here in samsara, and it's also lonely and intense when you begin to see things with clarity. Thoughts, questions? How's everybody doing? Okay.
Now I'm left to think lonely and intense to see things clearly. Then what? Like, why bother? I don't know. But I hear you, because I've been there. I've experienced that as well. Like, who am I? What is real? There's no ground. It's trippy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the thing that's intense about it can be seeing people suffering constantly based on ideas about themselves and others, right? About reality, about appearance being a particular way, not trusting themselves, seeking authorization to experience clarity from others, and not necessarily understanding that that's the essence of their being, that clarity. That is hard to be in relationship to. And it's like watching a house burn down, in one way. Yeah, Eli.
Yeah, I appreciate that kind of sentiment. Excuse me, like that lonely and intense either way. I think I have been kind of confronting that phrasing, at least, of my emotions over the past couple of years, of like, whoa, even if I'm really doing it, I've been in this practice since I was a young child. And so coming up to being 30 next year, being like, wow, okay, so 20 years in, of conscious effort, and I'm still here. It's still just as intense. This grief is still grief. And I've come to the, like, what's the point of it all if it's all grief anyways, point many different times in my life. And lately, I've kind of found a nice solace and motivation, or at the very least a curiosity on my worst day. When I meet that same grief again, it feels like, oh yes, the grief, nothing is like arising. There's just what's happening right now. And so, yes, I may have to lose the things I love for revolution's sake, for the sake of liberation. It might not look the way I thought it would look. I might have to put some things down that feel very painful, very heavy, put these narratives down. And I tell myself about my friends and family, about my estranged family, my loving chosen family, things like that. And for me, it's been, sorry for this kind of long-winded response. I've been sick all week, so this is the first time I've really talked in a week, but for me, it's very kind of like a chance to practice. The grief is always there. Like, how do I just keep diving into this grief to unfolding the love underneath it, and where it's like coming from, into the grief underneath it, that's healing, and like fall into that. And so for me, at least right now, in a good mood today, it feels less like hopelessness and more like, oh, look at all of this that was always there.
Mhm.
How do I see it more clearly? And that's been, I don't know, it's felt really nice to dive into practice in that way over the past couple of months, rather than when I was feeling a little bit more burnt out at the beginning of the year and feeling like, oh, the grief again, the grief again, the grief again. Why can't we heal my friends? Now I'm just like, oh yes, the grief again. Here we are in this connection. Here we are looking at this mirror. Can I wipe it clean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, Eli, I appreciate that. And I think, the fascinating thing too, right, is within the context of all of this, we can feel everything that we do. We can feel grief, we can feel inspiration, we can feel, energy, we can even feel, a blissfulness in all of this. The primary operating aspect of the view that's important to remember is the fleetingness of every particular experience, right? So the grief might arise, but the grief is impermanent. As these things have a way of exacerbating themselves the more we fall into some relationship to an expectation around what it's all supposed to be, right? Which can be so it's as if to say, if your desire in practicing is to feel good, then maybe it's worth not practicing at all, right? Because that's not what the point is. Right? The point is the liberation of suffering, which doesn't mean it's all like, creature comforts and happy times, because we're releasing ourselves even from the good, right? We're releasing ourselves from both. This, release into non-dual spacious ease is ultimately a blissful thing, but it is still tragic nonetheless to see, the suffering that we will go through at times, but then also those around us. And that ultimately that suffering, we will say in aspiration prayers, oh, may all the suffering end, may it decrease. But there's also this rather intense thing that our suffering is ours to have to be able to release, right? Like, you know, the Buddha, you know, himself said it, like, I can't do this for you. I can't remove this, right? Everybody has to, you know, essentially enter into being able to do this for themselves. Sometimes, you know, in community, sometimes, you know, in a solitary way. It is really helpful to, you know, have teachers to help guide one. But even then, you know, some of those kind of hard, dark night of the soul kind of experiences need to be engaged, right? If and it is unfortunate in the US at least that the kind of like wellness industrial complex has kind of woven its way into the Buddhist publishing industrial complex. And so you get a lot of weird ideas about, you know, if you just practice Buddhism, like, you know, it turns into a prosperity gospel kind of thing. Like it all goes away, you know, and there's nothing to go, there's nothing there, there's nowhere for it to go. So like, and again, kind of going back to a lot of people's points here, we still have the vestiges of this duality, even in the way that we relate to Dharma or explain it. Oh, if you do this, then or, you know, this will make, you know, all the bad stuff go away. Well, like it's all stuff. Like it doesn't really matter. And like we've seen, like one person's good stuff is another person's bad stuff, and vice versa. So it's complex. I mean, I think the healthiest perspective is no perspective. Right? The healthiest location is no location. The healthiest, you know, Milarepa would talk about being a like yogin of space, right? So, you know, occupying this place that is neither obsessed with either. If that's, you know, that's helpful. So let's see. I'll go on to the next line. So Saraha says, whoever here is afraid of birth and dying, they try to produce gold out of mercury, right? And so we're afraid of birth and dying. You know, essentially we're trying to engage in an alchemical, I mean, it's inevitable. Death is inevitable. Rebirth is most likely inevitable. Anybody who's trying to find a way out, you know, he's basically like, you're talking about alchemy, right? You're talking about making gold. Right? If you're afraid, right? You know, the way out, like your fear is not going to do anything. That's what he's saying. We need to be able to understand that even death and even birth, or this chain of constant incarnation, is okay, right? It is just appearance. Even that doesn't have reality. And this is this other piece, right? So let go of concept, let go of projection, let go of imputation, let go of value judgments, let go of birth, let go of death, right? Let go into the essence of all of this. And again, you know, going back to this reflection on how infected we are by Abrahamic values, death becomes something we fight, right? Everybody's often hear, you know, people talking about fighting, the fight against cancer, the fight of this, or when somebody dies, oh, they were a fighter, they were, you know, they fought the good fight. They were here, and they experienced what all of us experience, right? The highs, lows, joy, suffering, sickness at times. It gets worse, we die. You know, to think that we can escape this, and, you know, I mean, this is the interesting thing too, right? It's like, you know, to what extent this is definitely helpful for us to contemplate. To what extent is my Dharma practice an attempt to get out of dying? Or to escape from lack of comfort? You know, and it's not that Saraha's like, yo, you all need to be like gothy and, you know, and suffering all the time. But again, you know, if we're really going to take this like to completion, we need to step in to that which is dark and stinky just as much as you know, stepping into all the bliss too. So he says, the pilgrim who roams the earth or their own mind, how can they avoid old age and dying? Right? The pilgrim who roams the earth or roaming your own mind, right? This is what we're talking about, roaming our mind through Mahamudra, right? This means roaming through our tightness, roaming through our looseness, roaming through our obsession with being good, or our obsession of being with bad, you know, being bad, which a lot of us are, right? All the negative self-talk, the way we, you know, create these stories. I'm such a bad person, I'm a broken practitioner. Oh, if I only received, you know, this kind of instruction, I'd be, you know, anybody who's like too associated with that doesn't truly understand Buddha nature, right? Doesn't understand what a profound shine that Sujata Garbha offers all of us. And it's not even that it's offering it to us, it's right here. Right? It's constantly there. The pilgrim who roams the earth or their own mind, how can they avoid old age and dying? So even in all this, right? All this stuff. And each one of us is going to age to some extent, right? But even that's not, you know, so determined, right? People die when they're 30, when they're 20, when they're 6, you know, when they're 2, right? So even the aging isn't necessarily guaranteed. Or we could say that the aging is at the very least relative, but then each one of us will die. Right? Every one of us. And some deaths will be painful, some deaths will be fast and beautiful. Right? Some will, you know, it'll be as if angels or dakinis are singing spontaneous dohas. For others, it will be, you know, this long, arduous hardship. But it is inevitable. Right? So it's also worth considering, like, am I trying to escape that? You know, where is my, you know, do I want my Dharma practice to be so am I being realistic about the situation? And then he finishes with, which comes first, spontaneity or Buddha karma? Saraha says, my religion is a thought-free mind. All right. So for those of us who are trying, you know, we're hanging out with friends and getting into some debates or arguments, trying to figure out which comes first, spontaneity or Buddha karma. Saraha says, you know, basically, this kind of stuff's not for me, right? I like to rest with a thought-free mind. Let, you know, we let everybody in divinity schools try and figure that stuff out. Right? And besides, nobody has figured it out. And usually we try and figure these, I mean, practically speaking, like usually we try and figure these things out when we're too afraid to practice. Right? It's, we could say that's cheap information, cheap knowledge. It's theoretical, it's relegated to debate and, you know, intellectual speculation. But resting into the experience of a thought-free mind, right? Free of reference point, free of center, free of edge, free of flavor, free of tastes, right? Meaning everything is of one flavor, everything has one taste. Then we're talking about something. Right? And it's, you know, it's helpful to be really honest with ourselves sometimes. Those moments we get really into that like heady space. What are we really doing? You know, like that is an attempt at bypassing the development of actual experience. Oftentimes. I guess it's helpful to understand something, but you don't need to, and I know this, like you don't need to understand something to experience it. Right? You can experience without knowledge. This idea of experiencing pre-cognitive things, right? To experience that which is precognitive, that which is occurring before thought, before conception, has interesting relationship to these practices. Right? And I can't speak for other places, but I assume it's similar. But in America, we are obsessed with knowledge gathering, knowledge owning. When you get a master's degree, you're a master. Right? All of this stuff. Yeah, exactly. Lorena, thinking this stuff is for our colonized minds. Yeah. And colonized by who? This is the thing. That part may not even matter. Right? Because Saraha this is not like the American Charya-Giti. Right? He wrote this, very early in India. So we've been colonizing our minds. This is what we're good at that. Everywhere in the world. Right? We colonize by, again, falling out of the non-dual state. What is it like to settle into this without there being, I think it's also interesting too, like, to really think of this outside of a dualism, right, means that we can't shift blame onto our ignorance. Because it's not about being in an unfortunate situation as much as it is simply being out of harmony with the way everything actually is. And I think that there's a lot of benefit and utility in kind of beginning to think of it this way. Right? Because we're not reclaiming agency. We're settling back into harmony. There's nothing to take from some other place. There's no, if we could say ignorance is the oppressor, that assumes that ignorance is something other than the child of Rigpa. But ignorance is as much the child of Rigpa as knowledge is the child of Rigpa, or love is the child of Rigpa, or hate is the child of Rigpa, or sadness is the child of Rigpa. All of these things have the same source. When left alone, all of these things return to harmony. And this is what he's pointing out. And shadow and light are the same thing. They're just two things that happen to be happening. Yeah. Thoughts? Yeah, Remy.
It's actually Jasper this time.
Oh, Jasper. Okay, cool. I didn't see I just saw the yellow hand.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, I actually wasn't in the room, but you mentioned Thomas Merton, who is a writer that I love, and I have a book of his poetry that he released, I think the last one before he died. And there's a passage in here that I wanted to share, and it felt like this was a good time. So the title is Cables to the Ace, if anyone's curious. The perfect act is empty. Who can see it? He who forgets form. Out of the formed, the unformed. The empty act proceeds with its own form. Perfect form is momentary. Its perfection vanishes at once. Perfection and emptiness work together, for they are the same, the coincidence of momentary form and eternal nothingness. Form, the flash of nothingness. Forget form, and it suddenly appears, ringed and reverberating with its own light, which is nothing. Well then, stop seeking. Let it all happen. Let it come and go. What? Everything, i.e., nothing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bokar Rinpoche, I've mentioned this before, but when he was teaching Mahamudra would often say, don't get weird, right? Like this whole thing of like trying to be, not trying to, but like we're really, 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 really moving, our mind through all the dualisms that exist, especially in the relative world. Is trying to, I guess, tell people that we can practice this directly and still be here and not be some kind of like, harmful, like intense person that is just telling people they don't exist and, or doing terrible things and saying, well, I don't exist, I don't know, it's like kind of like gaslighting, like Mahamudra gaslighting. We could just go through life in, our ordinary way, deconstructing this whole thing as we go. And there's so much beauty in doing that, right? And we can find ourselves in the most common, ordinary places like a supermarket in a very, very spacious, loose, free, dynamically pure way. And that's what Sraha is asking us to kind of see if we can do that. He's like, do you want, if you want to taste. But there's this kind of megalomania often associated with spirituality in the United States. I saw this really fascinating thing someone on Facebook posted, like the 5 least religious countries in the world, and an image of the 5 most peaceful countries in the world, and they were almost the same countries. In the US, like we are so, like it is so faith obsessed, right? Which is why we have like Taliban's on both sides, right? Or just trying to like, force people to, conform to the way that they think. And for, the Mahamudra practitioner, we just glide through, this is the way to, this fighting, this constant battling over whether or not things are true or not, or, it's so old, it's not even exciting, right? It's boring. We've been doing this forever. It's like, so even just showing up into the everyday world, loose and free of self-location, is so radical and disrupting, right? It allows somebody to actually look you in your eyes, right? Or smile, or be okay when everything is falling apart around everyone, right? Or be focused when everybody is unable to focus because well, good or bad, I can't figure this out. Well, there's no, I'm used to this. let me help you a little bit here. Like, I don't particularly, doesn't matter to me if this is good or bad. I think there's so much beauty in this, and this is what I mean, right? If we need to do this work of solving a lot of society's problems, maybe being outside of the mathematical set is the way to do it, you know, because we can see what the mathematical set has, where it's gotten us. It's no change. You know, ancient Egypt, no change. Ancient Greece, no change. Ancient Rome, no change. You know, Mesopotamia, no change. Right? Medieval India, no change. Right? Humans are constantly looking for utopia, but can never see that in the mirror. And maybe that's the answer. So anyway, thank you all for being here and indulging me, and take really good care of yourselves, and let's dedicate this to all sentient beings. May all beings be able to recognize that their mind is beyond everything, and may that feel okay. Take good care, and see y'all next Tuesday.